Welcome to the Jungian Anthology Podcast, analytical psychology seminars from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Episode 14, Jung and Spirituality, with Warren Sibilla Jr., Ph.D. The slides from this talk are available online, and a link is in our show notes. And today's lecture will be introduced by Mary Doherty, Director of Programming and past President of the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago.
Hello, my name is Mary Doherty, and I'm here to introduce Warren Sibilla, who will be speaking on the topic of Jung and spirituality. Warren's presentation was a part of the September program 2015 on Getting to Know Jung. In this presentation, Warren spoke about how Jung explored and conceptualized the importance of spirituality in the lives of his patients. Warren addresses the difference between evidence-based treatment as a scientific approach to treatment with an emphasis on the objective experiment, in contrast to Jung's approach to treatment based on the subjective experience of the individuation journey. Warren showed slides of the ox-herding pictures from the 11th century China that parallel the phases of the individuation or spiritual journey. These images certainly enhance my experience of Warren's presentation, but his comments are extremely worthwhile even without the pictures. The pictures emphasize the irrational and the subjective experience of a spiritual practice versus the emphasis on embracing a rational and objective creed as a product. His comments also touched on how the symbol is contained within the image, as well as the importance of ritual in creating a container for spiritual experience. I'm sure you will enjoy his talk.
I don't know that you'll find a bigger proponent for these ideas and the application of these ideas across multiple areas than myself. And I could go on for a while, but I'll just tell you, my parents cleaned out their attic a few years ago, and my mom happened upon my first book report that I wrote in 3rd grade, which was on a book talking about dreams. And then she reminded me that I used to ask my siblings for their dreams at the breakfast table. So I've been with these ideas for a while. And there'll be time, if I go too fast, there'll be time at the end to ask questions. So I'm very, very pleased to be here. And also, I have a difficult topic, Jung and spirituality. Jung had 20 volumes, and I get about 40 minutes. So, and not only that, but 40 minutes for, just to introduce really the essence of the Jungian model, the real juice of the model. So the most that I can do is just introduce some of these topics and hopefully encourage you to come back for more. Okay. First, I'm going to start out with actually a couple stories. I'll tell the story of the money tree. Some of you might be familiar with the money tree, actually from South America. I rescued a money tree from the grocery store a couple of years ago, and it started doing well. The apartment that I'm here half the week in South Bend half the week, and the apartment that I had here, lots of window space, lots of sun, it did very, very well. And so then I decided, well is not well enough. It needs fertilizing. It could go faster. It could be greener. It could be bigger. My other plants need fertilizing. This one must too. So I fertilized it. And then little by little, it stopped growing. Not to worry, it'll catch up. My other plants are doing well. Just be patient. Then, one by one, the leaves started yellowing and they fell off. It's kind of like that Christmas tree and the peanuts, where there's all the leaves fall off. But then I waited, and it got late one night, and the last leaf fell off just before midnight. Now that's important. Really studying very carefully the whole experience. I got very sad. Then I decided, well, there is something that I could do. So I took it out, I washed it in my sink, washed all the roots, got a new pot of soil, and potted it, repotted it. This is the money tree today. I've had to twice move it because it's trying to push through the ceiling. And it's heliotropic, it moves toward the sun. And so if I continually twist it, I won't have to move for a while. It's very difficult to move from apartment to apartment. I probably should cut it, but I don't want to touch it. And I think that this serves as a wonderful example for the inherent order of the psyche, namely Jung's idea of the self, that the self is the grand paradox. It is the journey and the destination in one. Okay. He actually gets that idea, it says so, from the East. The journey and the destination, which is to say, the infant is no less whole on the first day as on the last day. Each and every day unfolds. Okay, my stories are about flowers now. My kids are older and independent, and so now I've taken on flowers and plants and trees. And in particular, the African violet. I went to a African violet flower show up at the Botanical Garden a couple of years ago. And it was really an incredible experience because you get to see the whole of humanity. Has anybody been to a flower show? Yes. They're kind of competitive. Yeah. I thought it was going to be a fun Sunday. These guys are competitive. I mean, how purple is purple? And they would have boxes where they would have their flowers, and they would, just at the right moment, they would present their flower to the judge, and it's really something. So then I started asking questions and realized that the people that didn't win then become judges next year. And it just rotates until their flower gets to win. So, but quickly I sided with the flowers. How purple is purple? Or am I purple enough? Right? Which is to say, we live in a world that has become obsessed with the objective. Our discipline is being, my perspective, is being infected by the obsession with the objective. For example, evidence-based treatment. Also, I teach at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and they are using a treatment manual to teach psychotherapy to would-be psychologists. A treatment manual. Now, the would-be psychologists, many of them really like this because it grossly simplifies what otherwise is quite complex, namely us. And they can then say, well, look, I did what it said on page 12. I did what it said. It didn't, So therefore, you're the problem, not the manual. Right? Jung's model, and in particular spirituality, is a relationship with the subjective. Okay? Now here, look at this. The hallmark of objectivity, science, right, is the experiment. We reach out into nature, take a piece of it, look at it, say something about it, recognizing a 5% error rate, we might be wrong a bit, then we put it back, right? The hallmark on the other side, the subjective, would be experience, right? Simply one's experience, my experience with my money tree or the flower show, my experience. The interesting thing is that experience and experiment are essentially the same word. They have the same etymology, which means to learn by way of repeated trials. The question becomes, do we trust this outer objective world, or do we trust the inner subjective world? Right? Now, I've posed that in terms of a dichotomy. Jung's model is a relationship between the two, but not one in spite of the other. Right? What he early on called number one and number two personality. Right? The objective, this outer world, and the inner world, our subjective experience. In fact, when you study very carefully, radically study one's subjectivity, you arrive at the objectivity, namely the archetypes, the universal patterning of our experiences. One very quick example. Two small girls that I've been seeing now for a couple of years, whose parents are going through a divorce. They are drawing pictures for me in their therapy. What's very interesting, independent of one another, they each, I see them separately, although back to back. Each of them has the full range of my art supplies. Each of them draws their parents using the exact same colors. That's the archetype. So even in one's radical subjectivity, there is a patterning. One doesn't have, in other words, it doesn't have to be objective at the expense of subjective. Okay, now, I think one of the ways, perhaps the easiest way, especially with the limited time that we have, to talk about this topic is to look at how it's been represented graphically. One of which would be the Oxfording pictures from Zen Buddhism, and in particular 11th century China. There are a series of, actually there are 4 series. There's a series of 5, 6, 8, and then the current set is at 10. I won't go into the history more than that, but they represent the spiritual journey. Okay, one way of graphically trying to represent some of these ideas. Now, this is the first picture, and these pictures are painted using the philosophical principle of wabi, W-A-B-I, which is akin to Jung's notion of individuation. Namely, that the picture as you see it is perfect, whole, and complete, lacking nothing. It is exactly as it's meant to be. Nothing is superfluous. Nothing is added, nothing is exaggerated, nothing is minimized. It is exactly as it's intended to be. Okay? That's very important. And for this final set, there is what's called a waka, W-A-K-A, which is a teaching poem. And for this one, the first card, it says, vigorously cutting a path through the brambles, you search for the ox. The ox is a metaphor for the self, the spiritual journey. Wide rivers, eternal mountains, the path seems endless. With strength depleted and mind exhausted, you cannot find it. There's only the gentle rustle of maple leaves and the cicadas' evening song. Okay, now, a few things to point out here. Yeah, we'll use this, the pointer here. A few things to point out here. First of all, recognize that the ox herder is amidst the forest. Okay, which has long been an image of the unknown, that which is uncharted, the unconscious, similar to the sea, the lake. Okay, the ox herder also is on a bridge. The ox herder is betwixt and between, in the middle, known in blues music as being at the crossroads. Neither here nor there. In a cross-cultural parallel, this would be the place of the altar in a cruciform shaped church. Right square in the middle. Neither north, south, east, or west, without direction. Notice also that the ox herder is looking over her shoulder. In psychoanalytic thought, depression is a consequence of what has not happened, but was supposed to have happened. It's rear view mirror living. Right? And more specifically, in Jung's model, it has a creative potential. It needs to be unpacked. So the ox herder is looking over his or her shoulder. They're looking backward. They're reflecting. They're not out in the metric in the world that's counting right, wrong, should, shouldn't, purple, red, high enough, low enough, fast enough, not fast enough. The symbol for Jung carries the energy. Okay? From the Latin symbolum, which means thrown together, the opposites thrown together. Okay? Regarding the symbol, Jung says, their pregnant language cries out to us that they mean more than they say. A symbol remains a perpetual challenge to our thoughts and feelings. That probably explains why symbolic work is so stimulating, why it grips us so intensely, but also why it seldom affords us a purely aesthetic enjoyment. So at best, a symbol seduces us, leads us, takes us into areas we wouldn't otherwise go. At worst, it torments us with what we don't know, but could know. The image is contained within the symbol is contained within the image. The image is the container. This is from the set from Pu Ming, the set of 6 pictures. Also the first picture, but that's what was changed. They added some on each end. Jung says regarding the image is always an expression of the totality perceived and perceivable, apprehended and apprehensible by the individual. It's a container of all opposites. The Waka for this first picture says, a raging ox with menacing horns runs away across hills and streams where black clouds shroud the valley. Who knows what sprouts lie crushed? right? And I think the last line there is particularly important. It ties in with both what both of my colleagues said. Without consciousness, we run roughshod, unknowingly. As Goethe said, there's nothing more frightening than active ignorance. You see this also in the political races. I mean, this season, I look forward to this once every 4 years when I teach, because I have all the examples I need right at hand. Why is that? Because when we get into groups, the projections start really flying very, very quickly. And that's one reason why Jung was very, very leery of groups. We get a group mentality, crystallization is what the social psychologists would call it. We would call it simply loss of ego, loss of individual voice. Okay. Now, if we go back to the Waka, remember the Waka said, with strength depleted and mind exhausted, you cannot find it. Right? Perfect, whole, and complete, lacking nothing. The image has all that is necessary. With strength depleted and mind exhausted, you cannot find it. Yes, you cannot. That's the spiritual journey. It's not up to you alone. There has to be some type of transformation, some type of death to the ego. Okay. Now, in extreme forms, say extreme depression with suicide, that change becomes concretized, literalized. Right? It can't be lived experientially, subjectively, however difficult. It becomes literalized. Right? One way or another, there has to be a change. That is the pattern of growth. There has to be a death to the ego. In Zen, they would call this the backward step, the great death, the backward step, looking within, finding the compass within instead of orienting oneself from without, outside oneself. That is to say, to live within the subjectivity of yourself. Now, Jung's argument, very simply summarized, was that the churches were treating this subjective experience as a static entity, putting it in the form of a creed, which makes it about belief instead of experience. That they're making a product instead of a moment. Right? I'll tell you a story. Our local parish, Catholic parish, this is several years ago, this was really bothersome to me. But I've studied the architecture of sacred architecture for many years, and realized that in our local parish, as with the Gothic cathedrals, the windows were typological, which in architectural language means one side tells the beginning of the story and the other side tells the other. One makes a promise and the other side answers it, which makes it a living experience. Right? Not a static entity, but a living experience. And I tried one Sunday after Mass to explain this, to ask the pastor about this, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I thought, okay, well, sorry, it's not his thing. So I was explaining it to him, and I can get worked up pretty quickly. And he said to me very nicely, put his hand on my shoulder and said very nice to me, he said, you know, I understand what you're saying, and I see that it's really important to you. My job is about filling the collection basket and filling the pews, and I really have my hands full with that. So I get what you're saying. It means, I see it means a lot to you, but that was about it for me. Yeah. That's prototypic, unfortunately. I know that's a stereotype, but that's prototypic. It's a product. It's being bought and sold at the expense of the experience, right? For Jung, it's the experience and studying very, very carefully the experience. Because without that study, the symbols will run roughshod over us. I mean, obviously there are certain religious symbols that, if treated in a particular way, will stir people up very, very quickly. You can't convince me that they're not loaded with energy, loaded with history. History, that is, loaded with experience in relating to these very powerful images filled with symbols. Yes? Okay, now, I have to jump to the end. Let's go back with this principle of Wabi, with this principle of individuation in mind. Let's look at this a little bit more closely. Vigorously cutting a path through the brambles, you search for the ox. The brambles are the thorny, vine-like structures, right? I mean, some states even use them as a kind of guardrail. I mean, that's how thick they are, right? We get through our complexes. We have a better relationship with our complexes. We try to get through these brambles, these step points. Okay. Wide rivers, eternal mountains, the path seems endless. That's exactly where they need to be. Right? Without opinion. Betwixt and between. So that one's strength is depleted, mind exhausted. There must be something outside myself. I don't have the answer any longer. Okay? Only the gentle rustle of maple leaves and the cicada's evening song. Now here's the clue. Cicada's evening song. We're told this isn't here, this isn't here, this isn't here. What is here is the rustle of maple leaves and the cicada's evening song. Now, the cicada is akin to the butterfly. Right? Now, the etymology is what analytical psychologists do. They study the etymology of all these words. The etymology of our discipline, psyche, is butterfly. Right? That precedes soul from the Greek. And what we know about the butterfly is that it begins with the larva, right? Not particularly attractive, gravity bound, and also prone to danger, right? Easily could be taken out. Then something happens, right? That's the important piece. Something happens, not of its doing. A process unfolds, and it cocoons. Still, that cocoon is in danger. Right? Something takes place within the cocoon, and then suddenly it's released. Right? Again, a process. And then it's no longer gravity bound. Right? Very similar to the cicada. So what we're told here is the natural rhythms of nature need to take place. Otherwise, you're not going to find your way out of this. Otherwise, it will be up to you, small y, instead of you in relationship to the self, capital S. Okay, now, with that in mind, notice that the ox herder has the reins in her left hand. She has the means at hand to relate to the ox. She doesn't see it. Also, in a similar manner, the ox herder is looking over her left shoulder. Left, not right. Left, the irrational. The subjective, not the objective. Objective would be right. Right? As an example, our faucets, the left faucet is hot, the devil. The right side is cold. Left side is the sinister, that which we don't know, that which is less socialized. We don't shake hands with our left hands, we shake hands with our right hands. So the ox herder is looking over her left shoulder. Yes, exactly. Into the subjective. So here it becomes then a means of how do we tie it together? The objective, the subjective, experience, symbol, image. And here I will introduce Jung's idea of ritual. Ritual is creating a container for the experience of the sacred. Creating a container, not created. It's a verb. It's continually creating, recognizing the divine, the spiritual, and participating in it. Ritual and participating in it. Seeing one's self as reflected in that whole. The experience of individuation. Spiritual practice, then, the concentrated effort toward embracing the whole of our human experience. Saying yes to all that it means to be human. Making it with my colleagues, it's Jung saying that it's this consciousness that will dictate our future. This consciousness. This container of the divine that will dictate our future. Not somewhere else. Notice this is card 8, the Enso, and notice on this, with this card, there's no first and last. There's no male and female. There's no objective and subjective. There's no dichotomy. Every point is equal to another. That's not to say that each point is the same. They're not. But no point is better than another. Each point is exactly as it's intended to be, when it's intended to be that. Okay, thank you very much for your time and attention. Okay. Please.
I liked what you said about depression being a consequence of what didn't happen and what was supposed to have happened, leading to rear view living.
Rear view mirror living?
Yes, okay. How does one stop looking in the rear view mirror?
What's happening in the moment? You know, I often use the example of if you're living your life using only the rear view mirror, you can only crash. That's the only thing that can happen. There has to be a combination. You have to see out the window. You don't drive without the rear view mirror. but has to be in combination with the windshield. The past does inform the future, but it can't be, the future can't be at the at the exclusion of the past, right? We say in psychology, where psychologists are asked repeatedly to do risk assessments. I have to do a risk assessment of a sophomore on Monday morning before they will let him back to school. Impossible. How do we predict behavior? Well, we say the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. You want to know what somebody's going to do, look to what they've done. Problem is, that's a linear model. And if you follow that out, that means behavior never changes. Well, that doesn't happen. So what's the antidote? What's the complement? The complement is the best predictor of future behavior is your intention. Well, we don't like that because we can't hold that, right? We can't objectify that. The school wants something objective. Tell us he'll never do this. Well, that means he wouldn't have a heartbeat. I can't do that. Well, reasonable certainty. It's Monday morning. How about that? That's reasonable certainty. So it's always a combination, but it's changing the ratio. So the complement would be to look in the present moment. What's not happening in the present? What are you not seeing in the present moment? What is being overlaid too much from the past, which is occluding a more comprehensive look at the present? Does that make sense?
It doesn't give me a real tool, except, I suppose, what would that be? To just meditate? Or,
Well, it's
listen to the cicadas? I'm looking for a tool I could use to stop the lifelong habit of looking in the rearview mirror.
you can in any given moment you can look at 10 items and become aware of them.
That's good.
This moment, this temperature, this feeling, this color, this then I say it's complex because there may be something still that needs to unfold from the past. Jung was very clear to say, you don't just rush in and open everything up in like Christmas morning. Things have to unfold over a period of time. So there may be things that still need to unfold. Jung's whole model is a tension of opposites. So one can't be at the expense of the other. So one complement to that would be, I'm here, I'm awake, this is soft, this feels warm, this is green, this is hard, this is lunch, and that brings you back into that moment.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That's very helpful.
Please, Mary.
I just want to compliment you because I think your image and your story is a lovely thing and metaphor for individuation, but it's also a lovely metaphor for therapy. It is how we walk along the path with our patient as it unfolds, listening to what's happening, listening to the rustle of the leaves and the small things that come forward in the process.
Right.
So I think I appreciate your sharing this.
Oh, thank you. Please.
Talk a little bit about the subjective and intuition. How does that play? Everything you're saying about objective and subjective. I was thinking in terms of intuition. Does intuition play into that, and how does that happen?
Talk about intuition.
Yes.
Jung's working definition of intuition, well, first of all, he said it was the sticky wicket. Right, Boris? It's the sticky wicket of the four because it is intuition by way of the unconscious. Perception, sorry, by way of the unconscious. Which is to say, people who are intuitive perceive things quicker, faster, and often more comprehensive than those around them because they're taking in a different data set. Not necessarily always so pleasant. I'll give an example. A year and a half ago, some of you may remember there was that drowning in the river. When it was frozen over, somebody had lost their cell phone from Minnesota, and they all just walk under the ice and get it, and then suddenly several of them were on and one drowned. Well, my apartment at that time was right across the way, and I was sleeping, and into the middle of a dream was, get up, something's happening really important now in the river. So, okay, got up, looked out the window, everything was happening. That's perception by way of the unconscious. You know, there's data there. We just tend not to take it in. And it requires a great deal of trust because it's irrational. It was one of the two irrational functions, meaning ratio that which can be, organized quickly, neatly. Irrational, that which can't be ratioed. Another time, my wife was planning a surprise birthday party, and I almost caught her. Almost. Just a few more hours and I would have been there. Because I was asking too many questions, like, something's not right, or something's not right, she finally said, would you stop asking so many questions? It's taking in data that is usually not considered, and honoring that, and seeing that there is a validity to that. Often it requires a lot more patience because it has to unfold over time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great.
Following up on that, sir, would you classify that as data that cannot be quantified and measured to produce outcomes?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I see that a bit differently because the mind's always going to take it in and try to hold on to it. So I would answer that by saying, does it always, by asking another question, does there always have to be? No, it doesn't have to be. William Blake said, truth cannot be told so as not to be understood and be believed. Truth is truth, it's always truth, it's never not truth. Two people can sit silently and know and experience a truthfulness. That doesn't have to be quantified. So, no. But the mind's tendency is to quantify it.
You're saying if this is legitimate data,
Yes,
it should not be discounted because it can't be measured
that's right.
or easily.
Right.
I'm back with the
Please.
plan. Because you wanted it to be more purple, you interfered with its natural process.
Yes. And it forgave me.
I'm sorry?
It forgave me.
You shit on it.
I did. I made it mine and not it.
Right.
That was a pronoun. The money tree.
Then your intuition told you something. That it's not wrong to interfere with the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that you have to interfere in the right way.
Yes, cooperate.
How, well, I won't ask you, but how do you know that washing all the stuff away is going to give it a new chance to be what it ought to be in the first place if you left it alone?
Good question, because it is where it's at now. I've had other plants die, and I've tried this and that, and they didn't, and I've had to come to terms with that.
So this is an example of chance?
It's an example of my giving the money tree its fullest opportunity to be what it was meant to be. As Jung says, the oak becomes the oak tree and not the donkey.
So this is what you're trying to do with your patients?
Yes.
The other thing, that was part one. Part two is the other thing, is about the oxen.
Mm-hmm.
Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and can't tell where to find them. Leave them alone and they'll come home, wagging their tails behind.
Mm-hmm.
The oxen's in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't see it. or an ox.
Mhm.
And he's not saying that the ox is the cicada.
That's right. But more importantly, he is the cicada. And then beyond that, he's not the cicada. We all are the cicada. And he's at best one thread in the whole tapestry.
My intellect doesn't go that far.
Or take one more and finish. One more question.
Okay. My president says one more question, Boris.
To speak to your question about intuition and reliability of the John Spirituality table, there's some very interesting information that comes from studies at the Stanford Research Institute. Just one, and this was in remote viewing. The concept I want to present is very brief. That's the difference between signal and noise. What they did in these experiments for remote viewing was have several subjects, several people, view the same remote target. And what the images they got images and then they tried to describe them, factor out the words, because that just messes things up. So when they compared images between viewers, there were similar elements and there were dissimilar elements. The similar elements are the signal, the dissimilar elements are the noise, and so in intuition, we're not trained, culturally, we're not trained to use whatever intuition is, this the modality of perception. And so it's really hard to know what is signal and what is noise. But the signal is valid.
Thank you, Warren.
This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it all you like as long as you maintain the attribution to the speaker, but please do not change it or sell it. If you like this episode, tell your friends about us or leave us a review on iTunes. For more information about classes, training programs, videos, audio, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, www.jungchicago.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.